What is going on, everybody? Welcome into the reveal of the number 3 team in my 2022 NFL Power Rankings with a deep dive into the Buffalo Bills. Before we get started, if you could do me a huge favor, please do take a moment to hit that like button down below. It really helps me out. If you're one of those diehard NFL fans binging through every one of these leading up to the season here just a week from now as of this recording, even closer as of when you're watching this. But if you've been enjoying this series, if you could do me a huge favor, hit that like button. Would really help me out, help push this video out to other diehard NFL enthusiasts like yourself. Make sure you're subscribed up as well. We've got more great NFL content just around the corner after we finish this series up. We've got my full NFL predictions show where we're going to be doing records, awards, Super Bowl winner, all that good stuff on Wednesday, and picking up with my regular scheduled NFL content as well. So lots of exciting stuff ahead. And without further ado, let's get into the Buffalo Bills. And this is a team coming in at number 3 that I think most people are going to say this is too low. This is really kind of the media darling right now, the Buffalo Bills. All of the hype is in on this team as kind of the consensus number 1 team in football right now. They're Super Bowl favorites. Everyone's ranking Josh Allen as the best quarterback in football. Just a lot of hype for this team. And obviously, I'm in on the hype. Like, I expect this team to be one of the top teams in the NFL right there at the end, competing for a Super Bowl. But I do disagree that they are the best team in the NFL right now. So I'm excited to really break down why. That said, there's a lot of exciting stuff about this team. It's not going to be a pessimistic deep dive. I'm just preparing for the influx of people that are mad that the Bills are not number 1. Now, before we dive into everything that we do here in this series, I do have one thing that I want to say about this team that kind of plays off of what I just said about perhaps why I'm a touch lower on this team. And it's something I said about the Philadelphia Eagles from last year. It's something I said about the Miami Dolphins. And it's that basically the baseline for how I view this team off of what they accomplished last year, I think is a little bit lower for me than public perception. And that has to do with their schedule and the teams that they did actually end up beating last year. And more importantly, the quarterbacks and offenses that they faced that allowed them to come out of last year with the number 1 ranked defense. Spoiler alert, I don't think this is a top tier defense in the NFL. I think it's a very good defense. But if you look at their wins last year, outside of beating the Chiefs, there's not a ton of impressive wins on there. Yes, they beat the Patriots twice. I will give them that. That is impressive, but a rookie quarterback on a team that many people thought overachieved last year. You got the Dolphins twice, the Jets twice, the Giants, the Texans, the Commanders, the Falcons, the Panthers. They didn't really go on a huge, epic journey dominating good teams last year. Yes, they got hot and had an impressive playoff performance, and that's a big part of their hype here. But I think it's notable that they lost to the majority of the good teams they played, and they even had some pretty ugly losses in there as well, including the Jags and that Week 1 Steelers performance. So I'm not going to say they were fraudulent last year. I think they were a really good team, but I think this idea that they're coming out of last season as a team that should have won the Super Bowl and was the best team in the NFL last year, I disagree with that concept. But anyway, let's dive into this team's offseason, a really busy offseason, a lot of turnover with this team, I think mostly for the better. So their big departures, this is where I would say it's not for the better. They do lose Brian Daboll, who I think is one of the top most brilliant offensive minds in the league right now. That is probably this team's biggest question mark, is can Dorsey step up and really not miss a beat? So we'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. But from a roster perspective, some moving pieces on the offensive line, most notably Darrell Williams, who started for them last year on the way out. Some wide receivers being let go here. Cole Beasley, Emmanuel Sanders, going with a little bit more youth with that group. And then on the defensive side of the ball, really 3 starters out the door here. Harrison Phillips, who did deal with injuries last year, Jerry Hughes, and Levi Wallace. Some smaller departures as well, some rotational offensive and defensive linemen. Cody Ford, John Feliciano, Vernon Butler, Starlo Telele, Afe Obata, Mario Addison. That's a handful of front seven players really being flipped over here. Almost all of their offensive and defensive linemen are being exchanged, or at least the majority of them are. Now, that does not come without some really nice additions as well. They do go out and get Roger Saffold from Tennessee. They bring in David Kessenberry from Tennessee. They liked what they saw from the Titans' offensive line last year quite clearly. They draft James Cook in the second round to hopefully give them a little bit more athletic juice in that running back room. And then on the defensive side of the ball, Daquan Jones, Tim Settle, a couple of defensive line signings to make up for those three pieces that they lost from last year's team. The big one, Von Miller coming in here, I think a huge source of all of the optimism for this team. I'm also going to include Tre'Davious White, who missed the second half of last season. Did play 11 games for them last year, but was not a part of their end of season and postseason run. It's big to get him back into the mix. And then they draft Kaiir Elam out of Florida in the first round. So they're hoping that secondary will be even more improved. Some smaller additions as well, some depth on the O-line, a good piece in Greg Van Roten, Jamison Crowder, good slot depth / half starter, and Khalil Shakir, nice fifth-round pick that's got a lot of hype and expectations for a day 3 receiver. So definitely a busy offseason for a top-tier team. And it's going to be a fun roster to sort through all this stuff. But first, I do want to talk about this coaching staff, how they rank stacked up against the rest of the league. So at head coach, I love Sean McDermott. I think as far as being a culture glue guy, he's top tier. Big part of him ranking is the 5th best head coach in the league, but also a really good defensive mind as well. I think this defense has relatively consistently overachieved. I don't think he's the best defensive mind in the NFL, but certainly very good and good at communicating his scheme to his players. So they rank 6th for me for defensive coaching, and a big part of that is Leslie Frazier here as well, a very good defensive mind. And then offensively, Ken Dorsey getting promoted. As I mentioned, this is probably going to be the biggest question mark for this just team as a whole. You go from Brian Daboll to an unknown offensive coordinator. Ken Dorsey, 41 years old, has been here and should be really copy and pasting the scheme that Brian Daboll has implemented here with Josh Allen. And it's impossible for us to know from an outside perspective to know how good Ken Dorsey's going to be. Does he know when to pull the right levers at the right time in the same way that Brian Daboll did? And will the play calling creativity, most notably with the quarterback run game, be quite as good? You can be optimistic that it will. It's just going to have to be wait and see. And I feel pretty good that things are going to transition pretty smoothly here. Dorsey obviously did an excellent job as the quarterback's coach for Josh Allen. Brian Daboll's gotten a lot of credit for that as well. So, yeah, it's kind of wait and see with Ken Dorsey. They still rank for me 7th in terms of pass game coaching, 17th for run game coaching, just because I think outside of the creative QB run stuff that they do, I don't love their run game. But in general, still very optimistic about this offensive coaching staff, but it's not, ranking 3rd or 4th like they would have with Brian Daboll. I think it's a step back until proven otherwise, and I think that's fair. As far as schematically what the Bills are going to look like on both sides of the ball with this offense, it's like an explosive West Coast modern pro spread offense. It's not one of these wide zone play action heavy stretch run schemes. It's not an under center power traditional pro style offense. It's a lot of shotgun. It's a lot of West Coast concepts. Use bubble screens and jet sweeps and a lot of those modern spread principles to spread the defense out, get a guy like Isaiah McKenzie involved in the quick game, make your quick game and your horizontal passing game a large part of the run game. You also see a lot of the read option, power option stuff that they implement with a running quarterback like Josh Allen. And then as far as the deep drop back game, They will run a lot of play action out of shotgun. They'll run it under center as well. It's not like they're always out of shotgun. But what they really put an emphasis on here in Buffalo is deep developing crossing routes. It's just something that Josh Allen sees develop really well and is really accurate at throwing those deep crossers. So it's something that they really have implemented well into this offense, and I don't expect that to change with Ken Dorsey. From a run game perspective, it is a lot of inside zone out of shotgun, a lot of duo under center as well. Although it is worth noting that even though the heart of this offense is going to be the zone blocking, they actually ran the 7th most gap runs in the league. I think a big part of that was the QB power element that they introduced, but very, very split as far as their run game. So I guess I can't say it's a true West Coast spread run game. And then with Leslie Frazier and Sean McDermott, of course, overseeing this defense, it is a 4-2 quarters heavy kind of modern meta style defense. The popular defense around the league right now is this split safety system where you can get 2 hybrid safeties to rotate up and down, confuse offenses rather. Obviously base out of quarters coverages, where this team was, I think, 3rd or 4th in the NFL last year as far as most quarters defense ran. But the Bills mix in their own creative elements as well. They actually were top 5 in the NFL in man-to-man coverage last year. So they were almost exclusively running quarters and cover 1. I think it's about 70% of their coverages were those 2 alone. So they are allowed to take a Kyer Elam, for example, who's much more of a press man corner. They are allowed to use these safeties, not just in quarters assignments, but in cover 1, where one can rotate high and be that single high center fielder type, and one can come down, either run a hook zone, or both of their safeties, being former cornerbacks, can come up and run man coverage in those cover 1 calls as well. So a ton of flexibility on the back end, but they definitely love 4-2 base nickel running quarters coverage and cover 1. And then cover 6 would be another element of that confusion and disguise that they're able to do. So there's your scheming with this coaching staff. But now let's get into the fun part and talk about this team's roster, starting with the offense and the passing game and their quarterback, Josh Allen, who I rank 4th right now in the NFL, and that's going to get criticized. The majority of people are actually ranking Josh Allen as the number 1 quarterback in the NFL, and I want to remind people that I am not some anti-Josh Allen guy. I had a tweet in, I think it was 2019, where I said Josh Allen, who at the time was viewed as like the 20th best quarterback in the league, has a lot of parallels to someone like Patrick Mahomes, and if you put him in a nice situation like Mahomes has, they might look a lot more similar than you would think. And here they are, ranked very closely next to each other, and at the time that was ludicrous to say that. And I've also held for several years now that Josh Allen is the most physically gifted quarterback in the history of the NFL. The combination of course, arm strength, and then you pair it with his size and his athletic tools, where he's a legitimately like Cam Newton-esque athlete as far as speed and quick twitch. Like, he is just different. And when he's on, as we saw in the playoffs last year, he is unstoppable. I also loved him coming out, was my QB2 in that draft, applauded the Bills for going up and to get him. So I am not anti-Josh Allen, but I'm also a realist. Like, yes, he was incredible in the playoffs last year and finished his season as good as it gets. Probably the best 2-game stretch that we've seen from an NFL quarterback in a long time in the playoffs. But I've talked about there being a lot of overreactions to last year's playoffs, whether it's Josh Allen here being ranked number 1 in the league by a lot of people saying Kyler Murray's trash, Aaron Rodgers is a career playoff choke artist. There's been a lot of overreactions to this most recent NFL playoffs. I think Josh Allen being ranked as the number 1 quarterback is really like the epitome of that. I think he's great. I have him as the 4th best quarterback in the NFL, and it's great to know that he can perform like that, not just in the regular season, but in the playoffs as well. But you also need to remember that he had a lot of inconsistent play throughout last season. Nobody was talking about Josh Allen as the MVP of the league. And before the playoffs started, no one was saying Josh Allen is the best quarterback in the NFL. You're talking about a quarterback that did go into Jacksonville and shit the bed and did have some really ugly performances, 4 or 5 games last year that he really let the team down with inaccurate throws, poor decisions, and was a big reason for everything I just said with, no one would say he's the best quarterback in the NFL. So I'm not going to continue down that path. I think Josh Allen's awesome, and he's gotten better year in, year out, weeding out, feels like every year, just a couple extra of those Josh Allen effort plays that oftentimes lead to turnovers that were a huge problem earlier on in his career. I think every year he's gotten more comfortable, weeded out just a few more of those per year. Granted, they are still in there. Continuing to weed those out, continuing to get more accurate year in, year out, which has been really an impressive feat for him. And continuing to get better and better with the consistency within the structure of the offense. One thing that really stood out last year was really not afraid to hit those flats, get the ball to the running back. Devin Singletary had a really productive year for them as a just check down option. Now they bring in James Cook, could really add some explosiveness there. So continued growth could still be expected for Josh Allen, maybe should still be expected. And I don't think it's crazy to say that this year could end. The Bills are Super Bowl champions, and Josh Allen, from my perspective, is the best quarterback in the NFL. But based on everything we have right now, I still have 3 other guys ahead of him, just due to some of that consistency and sample size. So I think it's fair. I think it's a little bit outlandish to say he's the best quarterback in the NFL. But again, if you want to go out on a limb and predict that he will be this year, I think that's kind of a slightly different conversation than the one I'm having. You have Case Keenum as your backup. Good, solid backup. Can keep this team afloat for a game or two if anything should happen there. So 4th at quarterback, obviously a massive asset for this team and a major reason for this team's optimism, ranking as the number 3 team in the league. But so are these weapons. They have really done a great job to develop these guys and bring in some talent and establish, to me, one of the better groups in the NFL. They rank 8th for me in terms of weaponry, starting, of course, with Stephon Diggs. Has been a true ex-alpha wide receiver and one of the 3 to 5 best receivers from the moment he got here to Buffalo. That true do-it-all, number 1 wide receiver where he can run the full route tree. He can contribute as a deep threat with speed and route running and release off the line of scrimmage to beat press and stack corners on the outside. Really rapid feet and technique and snap in his routes to run a lot of these deep ins, digs, and crossing routes, corner routes, all of the different stuff they can do in the medium to intermediate to deep aspects of this passing game, and a threat short, really good after the catch, slants, whip routes, whatever you want to do with him, Stephon Diggs can do it. And that to me is the true definition of the modern number 1 wide receiver, if you will. So not a ton of teams have that. They do. It's a huge asset and allows everybody else to have more defined roles when you have the one guy that can be your first read and do everything. So that's huge. And then you have really high hopes and high expectations for Gabriel Davis, especially based on his career trajectory, a mid-round pick with a lot of physical tools, but was a little bit raw coming out. And he's refined a lot of that, worked on his route running, worked on his hands, hitting the jugs machines. And he's the ideal number 2. He can really work the sidelines. He can be a deep threat, a good threat on hitches, comebacks, deep digs. And yeah, I mean, you can't really ask for much more than everything he's shown. And he finished the year red hot, was dominant in the playoffs, and you can totally see the momentum building here for him to become one of the better number 2 wide receivers in the league. Now, he was, for the majority of last season, their number 4 wide receiver, and is going to have to continue to prove that he can sustain success as a, star receiver on the perimeter. But I fully expect that to happen this year, and I'm definitely buying into the Gabriel Davis hype as the perfect complement to Stephon Diggs. And then it's for me, if you couldn't tell, for those that have watched this series, I love receiving cores with complementary skill sets. Some teams have a bunch of really good guys, but their skill sets are redundant. I'd rather have a group that can diversify their skill sets and use them in the right ways, where they're really only running routes at the things that they're really good at. And that's when you have Isaiah McKenzie and Jamison Crowder making so much sense as this team's number 3 and number 4 wide receivers. And I think we'll see a healthy dose of both of these guys. And I think both of these guys in their own right are sort of breakout candidates in a way. Like, I don't know if they'll necessarily be better players than I've known them to be, but statistically speaking, and their impact on this team, I think will be greater than it's been in years past. Isaiah McKenzie getting a clear-cut path here to being more of a starter, whereas last year you had Cole Beasley and Emmanuel Sanders kind of ahead of him. Now he's just kind of rotating with Jamison Crowder, and there will be a lot of times where both of these guys are on the field. So McKenzie is at the core that gadget type. He's the reason the New York Giants with Brian Dable drafted Wan'Dale Robinson in the second round. They wanted their Isaiah McKenzie. And it's the speed, it's the quickness, it's the ability to do pre-snap motion with him, use him as a mismatch weapon out of the backfield as a running back, give him jet sweeps, do all kinds of crazy stuff with him to keep the defense on their heels. And he brings that kind of as a nice baseline, but he's more than that. He's a really sharp route runner, and he has impeccable hands and ability to elevate for the football and compensate for some of his lack of size. So don't sleep on Isaiah McKenzie as like a legitimate starting slot receiver in the NFL. They paid him good money to be that. And yeah, he's in a great situation here to be a nice weapon for this team. And then you have Jamison Crowder, who's a little bit more of a traditional slot, maybe not quite as athletically gifted as Isaiah McKenzie, but still an above average NFL athlete, even at his age. He's a great route runner. He's a good leader for this team, a ton of experience from the slot, is a guy that has had a hard time staying healthy. So it's a good spot for him to be, where he can get 400 or 500 snaps, contribute as a fourth piece here. And I think he's going to be a really reliable, third down option and play a nice role on this team. Khalil Shakir is here. A lot of hype for what he's shown. I really think it's going to take an injury for him to get called upon, but he's a nice hybrid of everything we just talked about with McKenzie and Jamison Crowder. I actually compared Khalil Shakir to Golden Tate, which sounds like high praise, but you'll remember Golden Tate was actually a 7th round pick because he had a lack of long speed. Khalil Shakir is not going to be burning anybody over the top or winning from the outside of the field, but a rapid route runner, excellent release package, and excellent hands and run after catch ability from the slot. Very similar to Golden Tate, in my opinion. So they might have him down the road. They might have him in the event of injury to a Jamison Crowder or an Isaiah McKenzie to step up. Jake Kumerow, big-bodied guy. Impressive that he's stuck around on this team. Got to think that's special teams related, but not interesting, but a solid 6-piece. And they also keep Marquez Stevenson. They keep 7 players here. I think they look at those other 3 receivers and say, well, we don't really have a backup perimeter piece if anything were to happen to Diggs or Davis. Marquez Stevenson is a straight line vertical threat and could maybe play the Gabe Davis role potentially. So it's a nice receiver room, to say the least. It gets a little bit more, I guess, meh as you continue on. I like Dawson Knox a lot. Was one of my favorite sleepers in that draft. So again, I'm not anti Dawson Knox, but he is a player that I think the hype has gone just a little bit too far. Really good player, and similar to Gabe Davis, did get hot as the year went on last year, but I think he's far from a perfect tight end. Drops have really followed him throughout his career. 6 last year, 19 in his first 3 years in the NFL. Not an amazing blocker. He's solid there. And not the most quick twitch, best route running tight end either. He has good long speed, a really good fit within this offense, and a good piece for this offense. Again, I'm not trying to trash Dawson Knox. I just think there's a lot of Bills fans that are really aggressive saying Dawson Knox is like a top 8, maybe tight end in the NFL. I wouldn't go quite that far on him, but he's a really good piece and is obviously going to play his role as this team's pretty much only good tight end on the roster. because Tommy Sweeney basically has only shown to be a blocker at this point in his career, and Quentin Morris actually makes this team over O.J. Howard. I can only assume because he's showed out as a blocker. It was a bit of a surprise that they cut O.J. Howard. But then these running backs as well. I like James Cook. I think he's got a potential to be a premium receiving back in the NFL. My pro comp for him was Matt Breida, who this team had brought in last year. Matt Breida, obviously massive health issues, but when he's played, he's been pretty good. So straight line speed threat, quick route runner out of the backfield, good hands. No reason he shouldn't plug right in as the third down receiver and do exactly what he did at Georgia the last few years. And the arrow's pointing up for James Cook. You just only can rank him so high coming into the league. But I love the explosiveness he's going to bring in the screen game, where they run a lot of screens here. The check down game, something I talked about earlier on. And just being able to line up at wide receiver and run routes and provide some of that mismatch ability as well. So a really sensible piece to put into the picture here. As a second-round pick for a loaded roster. It was higher than I would have liked to draft him, but given the fit and the fact that this team didn't really have a whole lot of other needs, I understand why they valued James Cook the way they did, because their backups have no explosiveness at all. Before James Cook got here, by far the least explosive, least physically talented running back room in the NFL. Devin Singletary, who's like 5'7", like legitimate 4.7 speed, just not an athlete, right? Really good back as far as his skill, but his abilities, not so much. Zach Moss, similarly, just a bigger version with less skill. So, they're fine in the receiving game. They know what they're doing, but they're just not explosive enough to be a consistent weapon in that part of the game. And then Tywan Jones makes the team for his special teams ability. So, James Cook coming in here makes a lot of sense, providing some more juice underneath and filling out the eighth group of weapons in the NFL for me. And then we get to this offensive line. So it's a good offensive line. They rank 11th for me for pass protection, so well above average there in the top third of the league, and a little bit less in run blocking. So left to right, you have Deion Dawkins, who's a stud left tackle, do-it-all, franchise left tackle type. You got no complaints there. Left guard, they bring in Roger Saffold from Tennessee, who was still mauling guys and impressing me on tape for what he did for the Titans last year. But his pass protection has continued to dip and dip and dip every year as he gets up there in age. Some of that quickness most likely starting to wear off with him. And that's going to be a relative concern. I don't think he's a liability, but he can be beat relatively easy for a good pass rusher one-on-one on the inside. Overall, a good signing, though, and I think going to be a big upgrade to the run game, where he is, to me, a stud. And then at center, Mitch Morse, a little bit of the opposite, more of an anchoring, finely tuned pass protector, just not a lot of get-off and strength in the run game. Technically refined there, knows who to block and how to block them, but just can't always get there. So kind of, like I said, flip him and Roger Saffold as far as their strengths and weaknesses. Morse is a stud pass protector and an adequate run blocker. They're trusting Ryan Bates at right guard. I can't really blame him. Played really well in the second half of last year, and the arrow might even be trending up for him. I think just quite clearly a classic case of a Big Ten lineman that's got the toughness and work ethic that never should have gone undrafted. Not a big surprise that the Philadelphia Eagles were the team that initially liked him. They signed him, loaded offensive line, the Bills snipe him, and here he is 2 years later. Looks like a pretty good guard in the NFL, well-balanced player, and like I said, the arrow might even be trending up, so feel pretty good about that at right guard. Right tackle is going to be the question mark, honestly. They bring in David Kessenberry from Tennessee to give them a nice floor, a veteran that was kind of a breakout star last year for the Titans, honestly, because in that run-heavy offense, he was, think, like Mike McGlinchey that we talked about last year, a lot of similarities there. Really athletic dude to get out on the move. That wide zone offense was dominant, climbing to the second level, deleting and decimating linebackers. And is that going to translate here to a different system, a player that wasn't as good in the drop back pass game? I would say most likely not. I like his toughness. I like his work ethic, and a guy that has overcome cancer. So he earns the starting job here, and maybe he surprises as a pass protector. But at this stage in his career, I see him as more of a one-trick pony, really good run blocker. Maybe the pass protection, something that has held him back throughout his career. And honestly, it kind of makes sense that they choose him as the starter here because their option is Spencer Brown, who they tried to make a thing last year. They spent, I believe it was a third-round pick on Spencer Brown, one of the freakiest prospects as far as athleticism goes, but coming out of UNI, technically just not very refined in pass protection and was awful in pass pro for them last year. Didn't, I guess, hurt them. Their offense was still really good, but it was more despite Spencer Brown's pass protection, not thanks to it. And I think they look at Kessenberry and say, well, at least he's got better technique and is going to bring about the same impact in run blocking. So right now, Kessenberry is named the starter. The hope is Spencer Brown can continue to develop, and I don't see any reason he can't. All the athletic tools in the world, but it does make sense to me that they don't really want to trust Spencer Brown right now as far as pass protection, because there was a lot of ugly moments from him when he was starting last year. They also drafted Tommy Doyle last year, really athletic dude, fellow Minnesotan, so I'll be pulling for him, but hasn't really shown a whole lot yet. And then with the guards, I like the Greg Van Roten signing. Gives you a nice baseline. If Ryan Bates was a fluke last year, you've got an established veteran who's a replacement level dude. Ike Butker actually also started a bunch of games for them last year on the PUP currently, but I think they hope he can get back at some point. So really stable guard depth. And then Bobby Hart's just kind of a swing tackle. He is what he is. As a backup, you could do worse than Bobby Hart, who's gotten a lot of crap for when he was a starter for the Bengals, but he's not a starter now, which is fine. So a pretty solid offensive line all across the board. I think it's one of those offensive lines that will allow them to do what they want to do offensively, but maybe not a group that will necessarily help them do what they want to do. And then with the skill player blocking, it's fine. Dawson Knox is pretty good. They do have a good fullback in Reggie Gilliam. Uses my Madden roster, fun fact. Requested that I boost his speed, and I did. You've got Stephon Diggs is actually has a reputation around the league actually as being a very lazy run blocker. But when the playoffs hit, I will say he did his part there. So it's good to see when it matters, he can run block. Gabriel Davis, good run blocker with a lot of size. Isaiah McKenzie, more of that gadget type, not going to be asked to run block a whole lot. And within this scheme, it's not one of these Shanahan offenses where they're really leaning into those skill player blockers, much less so here. And then we'll wrap up the offense revisiting these running backs as real runners, and there's not a whole lot to say. It's one of the worst running back groups in the league. They rank 30th for me. I think your primary ball carriers are the two least athletic, quote-unquote, starting players in the league. Devin Singletary, Zach Moss. They bring some energy. They both bring contact balance, and I think in Devin Singletary's case, brings good vision. Zach Moss, to be determined, I think, on that one. So they'll do their part. They'll produce. This team sees a lot of light boxes as well, and that helps these guys. I think James Cook will have flash runs. Similar to, even Matt Breida had a couple flash runs. It'll be more with James Cook because the availability will be a little bit more. But James Cook is not some incredible runner. He really isn't. It's why I didn't love him in the second round for the majority of teams. He's a straight line guy. I think if he was in a wide zone offense, say San Francisco or Green Bay, his upside would be a little bit better as a runner. But inside zone, where it's more about quickness and change of direction and vision, I just don't love him in that type of offense, or even gap stuff that this team won't shy away from. But I get it. He's explosive. He's Dalvin Cook's brother. He played on a national championship offense. There's a lot of excitement about him, but I would say pump the brakes on him being a great runner of the football. It's more about his impact in the receiving game that I'm excited about. But they do get a huge boost from Josh Allen, one of the 5 best designed run quarterbacks in the NFL. And it's very Cam Newton-esque with him, honestly, because he's got speed and juice, but It's more about the power aspect with Josh Allen, where he'll lower his shoulder, he'll run through you, he'll stiff arm you, fight for tough yardage. He's a huge boost to this run game. He was last year, and I don't expect that to change, even with Brian Daboll leaving. So the offense as a whole ranks third in the league for me. Third in passing game, where you have all of the explosive elements. And then 16th for run game, where you have, I would say really just, it's the running backs that hold them back a little bit. The run games, the run blocking isn't incredible, but I will say 30th at running back is not going to help them have the most explosive run game in the league, but Josh Allen amplifies this quite a bit. Just for a little perspective, that's the difference. If they had a 0% QB run multiplier, they're actually 27th in the league. Just to kind of put into perspective how big that numbers advantage can help your run game, and the threat of, play action boots and stuff too. But now let's flip over to the defensive side of the ball. Really talented, well-distributed group here. A team that technically ranked as the #1 defense in the NFL last year. I never really viewed them that way. I definitely thought they were a really well-coached, disciplined defense that was really good. But I think that the amount of bad quarterbacks that they played last year, and a lot of bad weather games as well, skewed those numbers quite a bit. Now, I think this year's defense is going to be a lot better than last year's defense, but I don't think they'll finish as the #1 defense on paper, or statistically speaking either. So let's start with the defensive line, where this starts with the Von Miller acquisition and what this is going to mean for this pass rush that I think was something that, I don't want to say it held this team back, but it kind of did. Like, they just didn't have a great pass rush last year, at least not a super consistent one. And now I think it's much better. They're going to rank 13th in the NFL now, and the acquiring Von Miller is a big part of that. Now they're losing Jerry Hughes and Mario Addison, and even F.A. Obata had some good pressures. Like, they're losing some pieces, but you get a true #1 guy in Von Miller. So more perspective, they were 23rd going into last year, now ranking 13th. They're able to attract Von Miller here with everything they've got building. He loves the idea of being that last missing piece that this team needed, and that's been kind of the narrative, that he is going to be the reason that this team gets over the hump and wins a Super Bowl. It's a little dramatic, but I mean, he very well could be that for this team. And he started slow last year. I don't think he was fully into it in Denver. I can't blame him. Hard to throw your body on the line when you're looking at Drew Lock on the other side of the ball, and Teddy Bridgewater. But when he got to the Rams, he picked back up and honestly played his best football in years, especially when when playoff football came around. And it's crazy how different he is now. Like, he still has get off, he still has bend and all of the rush moves. That's what's made Von Miller such a legendary pass rusher. But what really stood out to me from his run with the Rams was how powerful he was. And he had some of that old man strength and just a different style rusher than I'm used to. He looked a lot more Khalil Mack than he did Von Miller for the Rams last year. And I'm assuming that's going to be the same case here. So obviously an impact there, and that strength shows up in run defense too, where I have him graded out as a superstar in both categories. So obviously a massive acquisition and a ringing influx of optimism for this defense to add a superstar player up front. But it doesn't stop there. You have Ed Oliver, who honestly, rewatching the Bills, diving into how he looked, especially in the second half of last season, I'm back in on Ed Oliver. I think people that have followed this channel saw me love him as a blue chip player earlier on in his career. It's almost a trend with a lot of these players. I like the guys they draft, and then I end up more middling on them. But I'm back in on Ed Oliver nonetheless. What he showed me down the stretch really impressed me, because he's always had those athletic tools, but it's been a matter of putting it all together, and I really thought he did towards the end of last season and into the playoffs. And he was great in that playoff game against the Chiefs, pushing the pocket, showing a little bit of power, of course, that quickness to change lanes and deploy different pass rush moves from the inside. And now he gets to be the second best pass rusher here. And I'm really excited to see this defensive staff potentially play off of the athletic combination of a guy like Von Miller and Ed Oliver. Now, from a run defense perspective, he is tiny. He's one of the worst run defenders in the league. As far as a starting defensive tackle goes, it's not really his fault. It's just something that's a part of his game. They knew it when they drafted him. And that's why you have Daquan Jones brought in here, who's just kind of a good starting nose tackle, but one of those few nose tackles that has good get off and is able to use his size to push the pocket and generate some pressure. So he's a good, versatile kind of interior piece there. And then you also have to mention Tim Settle, who will rotate and is similar to Daquan Jones as far as the style of player he is, or at least the impact he makes. He's a balanced starting caliber defensive tackle. But both guys better run defenders than Ed Oliver, so it will allow them to shelter Ed Oliver's weakness as a run defender by bringing in these two players in Daquan Jones and Tim Settle. And I guess while we're talking about Tim Settle, before we get to Gregory Rousseau, Tim Settle's been one of my dudes on this channel really since the Washington team drafted him. I've been saying he's stuck. He's behind Jonathan Allen, Daron Payne. This guy's got really quick feet. He reminds me in some ways of some really fun nose tackles of years past, guys like Vince Wilfork, BJ Raji, these massive tanks up top with slender, quick feet, and it allows them to kind of be uniquely talented as a rusher because they're really strong up here but quick down below, and they're able to change lanes and be effective pass rushers. It can hurt his anchor in run defense at times, but he holds his own due to his upper body strength and has good shed strength there. So I really like Tim Settle. Seems he's still not going to be a full-time starter. They list Daquan Jones as starter, but this to me is going to be a pretty even rotation, keeping Ed Oliver fresh for those rush downs where he can really be his best version of himself and not really worry so much about him as a run defender. Now let's talk about the fourth starter here in Gregory Rousseau. Was a my guy in last year's draft, and I love Gregory Rousseau. No pump the brakes talk here with him. I think year two is going to be big for him. Even for him to be an impact pass rusher for them in year one was a really pleasant surprise. This is a guy that we didn't really know exactly what he was going to bring right away. Even me, who really liked him, someone that played 1 year of college, super young coming out, really only played 1 year of football as a pass rusher. This guy was recruited out of Miami as an athlete, a guy that played tight end and receiver, so still learning the technique of the position. And there is not a better mentor in the league than Von Miller. Not a single one. He's known around the league for coaching up pass rushers, getting them to be the best version of themselves. So the fact that he gets to work with Gregory Rousseau is super exciting. Rousseau got a lot of criticism for his lack of pass rush moves, his lack of quickness, and ability to win with different moves, but didn't get enough credit, in my opinion, for his great first step, his wicked long arms, the raw power that he had in his arms. Super similar prospect to me to Trayvon Walker, who just went with the number 1 pick in the draft. Walker a little bit more fluid, better long speed, and more versatility, but Gregory Rousseau has similar traits as far as that ability to just fire off the ball and take command of his blocker. So very excited to see what he can do in year two. And the arrow is really pointing up for this pass rush in general. I think there's some optimism that they could be a top 10 group, and I would say Gregory Rousseau reaching some more potential would be a bigger part of that. Now, they have really good depth with this D-line. I think this is potentially the deepest D-line in the league. All the players they kept, I think, are pretty much starting caliber players, with the exception of maybe Boogie Basham. But even then, he's a year 2 player that would be an interesting piece for some other less deep defensive lines. But you've got AJ Epinesa, kind of peaked quickly once he got into the league. It's part of why he fell into the second round. Just not a super athletic, high upside player, but technically refined rusher. Has shed some weight and showed a little bit of bend, so he can rush the passer, he can defend the run. Good, balanced, just third edge piece to have, and I think he's going to buy a lot of relief for Von Miller for this defense. Boogie Basham is similar to AJ Epinesa. I think a little bit quicker. Showed some flashes last year, and Maybe he should have an up arrow as well, but I just don't think he's going to get a whole lot of opportunities with how many pieces are ahead of him. But as far as like injury insurance, Boogie Bashem's a nice piece to have. And then they got Shaq Lawson hanging out there. Talk about early down relief and good run defense support. He is a yacked up physical edge, a former first round pick who just never really escalated his game to be a good pass rusher. He's fine there, but he's made a lot of money in his career. He's bounced around. He's a scheme-proof, good early down, starting caliber, run defending edge. We talked about Tim Settle already, and then they bring back Jordan Phillips, who's kind of a nice fourth piece to have there, right? You have Ed Oliver, who's a pass rush specialist of sorts. He'll get starting reps on early downs as well, but you'll mix in Settle and Daquan Jones on early downs. But I think for true pass rush downs, especially for blitz packages, Jordan Phillips is an asset. He's 340 pounds, is a really nice first step, and has pocket pushing ability. So if they want to really get into cross stunts and pushing the pocket and generating a better pass rush, he can do that. It's just the discipline that he doesn't have in run defense that has always held him back a little bit, but as a fourth piece makes a ton of sense. So it's a really fun defensive line. If I have a criticism, it's that they don't have dominant interior run defenders. That is an aspect of this team that in certain lights has held this team back. They've been bullied up the middle of this D line, and I don't know if that's necessarily something that's going to change. I don't think it'll be terrible. They're 20th overall for run defense, and their edge group is really good against the run, but I still think a little bit of squishiness up the middle. You can't always protect Ed Oliver in run situations and get him off the field. So there's some areas there, but for the most part, this is a really good defensive line. Really good linebacking duo as well. Pretty straightforward. You've got your big Mike Thumper in Tremaine Edmonds and more of your weak side, at least cover specialist. Now, both these guys play middle linebacker for them. They're a 4-2 base, but you get the point. These guys play off each other really well. Both are good players, and I would say Matt Milano is a stud. In Tremaine Edmonds' case, I think the play diagnostics, the coverage IQ hasn't really always been there, but his athleticism, his size, his ability to get off blocks, and just the physical presence he brings helps them in the run game quite a bit. And they'll do their best to kind of scheme him out of coverage, use him as a spy man, as a short hook zone defender, as a blitzer, whereas Matt Milano is someone that they'll drop into deeper zones and try to lean into his coverage feel a little bit more than Edmonds. So good coaching helps these guys play into their strengths. And Matt Milano, I felt like kind of took a slight step up as a run defender last year. He's just not the biggest guy. It's never going to be a huge strength for him, but he's willing and has a really good processor of the run game and a quick trigger. So, he was pretty dang good there late last season. So as long as they're healthy, that's your duo. I have them ranked 6th for coverage, 10th for run defense, so easily a top 10 linebacking duo. You have some interesting depth. They draft Terrell Bernard in the 3rd round. I think they see a ton of similarities to Matt Milano. Good, not great long speed. Someone that had his problems in run defense, but a really heady IQ, high IQ cover defender. So I think they see him as a potential long-term Matt Milano replacement. Terrell Dodson's been a backup for them. He's been fine. Tyler Matakevich makes this team. He's been a backup for other teams, played well in those opportunities. They draft Braylon Spector as well. Braylon Spector going to have to make an impact on special teams, but showed some good coverage feel coming out of Clemson. And then Andre Smith is a bit of a thumper, really athletic guy. I'm sure they like him for special teams. He's suspended, may or may not be on this team when that suspension ends, suspended for PEDs, but definitely adequate depth as far as NFL linebacker depth goes, where there's not a whole lot of it. And then this secondary actually ranking 1st in the NFL, and this is helped by the New Orleans Saints recent news. I had the Saints ranked 1st. The nature of this series, there will be some change as the series goes on, which gives me a good opportunity here to promote my Patreon, where you will not just support my channel in a financial way, but you'll get exclusive content as well. You're going to get when this series ends, my full spreadsheet with all of these rankings. So you can sort through, see all of the changes as this series has gone on. Something like we're talking about here, the New Orleans Saints, they go and trade Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. 2 days later, their other starting safety, Marcus May, gets arrested for gun violence, and we don't know what his situation is going to be. So that's enough for me to push the Bills, who are right behind the Saints, up into my number one secondary in the league. But you'll get access to that full spreadsheet. You can see where all these rankings are. You get access to submit questions to the Fully Inflated Football podcast that we'll be picking back up when this series ends. And above all, you can get access to my weekly NFL picks, where I have yet to have a losing season against the spread there, picking games. So lots of great exclusive content. You'll support my channel in the process. You can go check that out on patreon.com/thatfranchiseguy. Appreciate you all showing your support. But back to this secondary, first in the league. Really just one question mark here, and that is a first-round rookie in Kaiir Elam. It's a good question mark to have, and Elam's looked really good in the preseason before getting banged up. That is something that followed him at Florida, so something to keep an eye on is, can he stay healthy? But that's your question mark. Let's just start with him. Coming out, I had a first to a second-round grade on him. Did see him as a true press man scheme fit. I thought he had horrible zone feel, not a high IQ type of off type of zone defender, especially in cover 3. I think quarters he'll be okay, because quarters is much more straightforward for these outside corners. There's a couple rules, but for the most part, especially in a system like this, you're running man-to-man on the outside. So the fact that this team was top 5 in man coverage, and when they go zone, it's usually quarters, I think he'll be pretty damn good in this system. And in time, he can develop some of that zone feel. It's kind of the Bill Belichick philosophy. Give me a guy that can run man coverage, I'll coach him up and teach him how to play zone. So pretty damn optimistic for Kaiir Elam. I think the value was sound. I think the upside is there. And yeah, there might be some learning curves. Corner is a really difficult position for rookies coming into the league. But he's got the tools to be an upgrade come year's end to what they had last year in Levi Wallace. But really freaking good beyond that. You have Tre'Davious White, hopefully coming back real soon. I don't know if he's going to be good to go week 1. Still on the pup, so there's time for him to get back for that Rams game, but might miss some time. Tore his ACL week 11 for this team last year. So kind of right on that boundary of getting back right around this time. But I do expect him to get back healthy and resume as one of the 5 best corners in the NFL. It really is that straightforward with Tre'Davious White. The dude's a superstar, and he was missed when he went down. So getting him back is probably the second best thing that this team had happen to them this offseason, behind getting Von Miller. Potentially even better than that. And then you have Taron Johnson in the nickel. Really freaking good player. I would say a top 5 to 7 nickel corner in the league. Not the most athletic guy in the league. So when they go man-to-man, some of the better slot guys might be able to get him. But, I mean, for the most part, really good technique, really high IQ zone defender. That's where he's at his best, is those curl flats out of those quarters coverages. So really, really good in that situation. And then you get to the safety group. It is the best safety duo in the NFL. I don't know if you can even really debate that. Especially with how great these guys are as scheme fits. We get another opportunity to talk about how awesome it is for former slot corners to make that move to safety in a quarters-heavy system, because in these defenses, these guys are going to naturally play closer to the line of scrimmage and play a lot of quarters defense, where they have to pick up slot receivers and convert those coverages into man very quickly. That means you have to have quick hips. You got to be able to flip, cover corners, cover posts. And these guys can both do that. Both guys, former slot corners, incredibly intelligent players with fluid athletic ability. Neither have the best long speed, but they have plenty. And because they see the game so well and they anticipate routes so well, they're playing a half step ahead of a faster safety. Say maybe a Darnell Savage in Green Bay in a similar system would be a great example. You know, I think you can make a case these guys play faster than a Darnell Savage because they're moving earlier. So both guys are really interchangeable, honestly. Superstar safeties. I think Micah Hyde's a little bit better, but I mean, you're really, pick your poison at that point. Both guys are awesome. Both getting up there in age. At some point, they're going to have to replace this duo, but both guys were excellent last year, probably the best year for both of them last year, and hard to expect that to change now. So they've got these guys in place, and it is, I think, the number one reason this is the number one secondary in the NFL, because they're so good on the back end. And their versatility just allows them to do everything. It allows them to do cover one, to run quarters, to disguise cover three, to disguise cover six. They can run any single coverage they want with these guys. If there is a knock on the starters, it's going to be run defense. Tre'Davious White, never been a great run defender. Kyer Elam, that was a knock on him and pretty much any corner that's ever come out of Florida. Just not great run defenders. Even Teron Johnson, a little bit more slender, not a great run defender from the slot. And then neither Hyde or Poyer are like these thumping box safety types. They're both solid tacklers and consistent guys, but in general, the Bills are pretty indifferent when it comes to run defense. It's a reason, though, that a team like Indianapolis was able to come in town and just beat these guys down the middle. It's a stylistic preference for this team. They want to beat the Chiefs and the Chargers, not the Colts and the Titans, for example. But it does hurt them in some of those games. Now, as far as the depth goes here, you have Siran Neal, who will play a role in dime packages. They much prefer to stay in base nickel, where you're 4 up front, 2 on the 2 linebackers out there, and your 5 starters. But they will naturally have dime packages, and they love Siran Neal as just kind of a roving safety slot corner hybrid. Really natural in that role. It's what he played in college. Athletic dude. They actually gave him a 3-year, $9 million contract. Good special teamer, I can only assume. I can't, don't quote me on that, but sound tackler and all that stuff. Kind of an ideal dime back, and he's in a good spot in that situation. So he'll get 12 snaps, so anywhere from, honestly, 2 to 15 snaps a game, depending on the offense they're going against and if they want to go to dime packages. They're very flexible that way. So he's got kind of a unique role in this defense. He's neither a corner or a safety. But as far as the cornerback depth goes, you do have Dane Jackson, who I like, a really heady player, really quick player, a natural fit as a backup corner here, just in general, can run their quarters defense really well, but he can step into the slot if anything happens to Teron Johnson. So he's good depth to have. Had to start last year and was fine. Cam Lewis, a veteran. Okay, Christian Bedford, late day 3 pick. Don't see a whole lot there at this point in time. So you have one piece. You're allowed to lose one piece there, right? Technically, Siran Neal could probably start as a slot corner. So as far as NFL corner depth goes, to have one good backup is kind of par for the course. And then the safeties, I see these as kind of the 2 guys that they're grooming to be potential replacements at safety. Jaquan Johnson, I think, can play. I wouldn't be terribly worried if one of these safeties went down and they had to go to him. I've liked what I've seen from him so far. It's just been limited sample size. Damar Hamlin, maybe a little bit less so, but wasn't a bad day 3 pick for him. So at some point, I would like to see them add more athleticism to the safety group here. But as long as your guys are healthy there, you're in really good shape, obviously ranking as my number 1 secondary. So the defense as a whole, pass defense, they're number 1 for me. You've got a much improved pass rush that should be really good, could be even better, depending on maybe Gregory Rousseau's development there. You've got a great linebacking tandem, and then you have the number 1 secondary in the NFL that's just leaning on a first-round rookie to be pretty good. So, yeah, the pass defense here, it's going to be phenomenal. Absolutely. But then with the run defense, as I've alluded to, I don't think this is a true strength for this team. I think it's a stylistic preference of this team. I think they're okay with not being super physical up the middle because it allows them to be more of a modern, athletic, best pass defense in the NFL. But a bit of that trade-off is you are a little bit squishy up the middle. You don't have these great run defending defensive backs coming down and squeezing space quickly. So teams like the Colts and the Ravens and maybe the Patriots in this division will look at this Bills team, and some of those teams had success with this formula against the Bills last year, and say, you know what? We're not going to get into a shootout with Josh Allen. Let's not try and go down that path, but we can run the ball right down the dick on these guys and try to keep Josh Allen off the field. And if we play smart football, we might walk out with a win. And I think that is a formula for certain teams that are threats to the Bills in this conference to potentially attack them. Now, the teams that are really going to be top threats for them are top teams in the AFC, the Chiefs, the Chargers, the Bengals. Yeah, we have the Ravens up there for sure, but most of these teams, I think the Raiders are another example of this. Most of these top teams in the AFC are more of these modern pass-heavy teams. Those are the teams that they're really building this defense to stop. So that cranks out the 6th overall defense. Again, I think this defense is going to be better in reality, but not the number one defense like they were on statistical standpoints last year because of all the crappy teams they played that inflated their numbers. So you got 3rd on offense, 6th on defense. I have them as a tier 2 special teams. You got a great kicker in Tyler Bass. Matt Ariza, piece of shit, out of there, but they bring in, I think was it Matt Hack? Who was it? Let me check. Sam Martin, who is also a pretty good punter. So their kicking game should be good. A team that has really good depth with the linebackers, and the secondary has some good special teamers out there. So, yeah, really good special teams. Tier 2 in the league. Not concerned about it. Their strengths and weaknesses. As a snapshot here, you've got coaching and culture. Absolutely a strength of this team, has been for a while. Maybe some slight question marks about the offensive staff turnover, but for the most part, I trust this team to earn that benefit of the doubt there. QB, huge strength, an explosive passing game with a massive diversity of skill sets. This team, when they're on, is going to be impossible to stop, like straight up. You've got the threat of Josh Allen in the run game as well that amplifies this run game, as I mentioned earlier, from the 27th run game all the way up to the 16th best run game. He really is that big of a difference maker in that part of the game. And then in the secondary, you got the number one group in the league, so that's obviously a huge strength. Going to be really hard to separate on these guys. D-line depth and balance is a strength for me because I think they just have so many different pieces they're going to be moving around. They're going to be rotating and staying fresh, and especially from a pass rush perspective, they should be pretty good there. And special teams are a strength, as we just mentioned. As far as weaknesses go, it's really in the physical aspects of the game. I don't think they have a dominant run game. I can say almost assuredly that they don't. The most physical thing they have in the run game is their quarterback trucking you. And then the run defense up the middle especially, like I think their edge run defense when they play like the Titans, for example, will be fine. But getting beat up the middle by a team like the Colts or the Patriots or the Ravens, I think could be a potential weakness for the Bills. But let's wrap up. Take a look at this team's schedule. How they come out as far as my win projections go. Their over-under is 11.5, the highest we've seen in this series so far, and I have them going over with a win projection at 11.8, but I think when you look at this, I think 12, 13 wins should be expected here. As far as AFC schedules go, it's pretty dang easy. I think the AFC East is very winnable for them. I think there's a good chance that they sweep their division with how well they're built this year. And then they also get to play the NFC North, where, Green Bay and Minnesota, being the two good teams in that division, are in Buffalo. So you've got, at Chicago and at Detroit should be winnable games for them. So that all plays out really nicely. Beyond that, you have to play the Rams upcoming here on Thursday Night Football. They are favorites. I think they're very capable of winning that game, but not going to be easy. They have the Titans week 2 in their home opener. Should be on Monday Night Football. Should be a good game, but I think they're in a good position to beat the Titans, who are coming into the year with a lot of question marks. At Baltimore, I do think is a really bad matchup for them. I think that might be their first loss of the year. You've got Pittsburgh coming to town. They should win that. At Kansas City after that. Should be one of the best games of the year, a rematch of that battle from last year's playoff game. They also get Cleveland right before Deshaun Watson comes back, week 11 there. And at Cincinnati, where I think they will be favorites, but that should be a pretty damn good game with pretty big playoff implications, I think, come year's end. So that wraps up their non-divisionally scheduled schedule, if you will. So I do have them going over 11.5. You round up to 12 wins there. I will say them being the most favored team to win the Super Bowl at 6-1. I would just hold off. I don't think you're ever gonna get a hot, like they're not gonna go higher than that. I think you're buying at its highest at that point. If you wait until we get to January and this team has gotten through a season and they're healthy, they're going to be probably 5.5-1 or 6-1 or maybe even less than 6-1. So I would say just hold off. Like, why put that money down now than bet it now? Because I don't think they should be notably higher than the Chiefs and the Bucks, who are our two remaining teams here. So there's your Bills breakdown. I hope I wasn't overly negative. I know we started with kind of some points on why I'm lower on this team than this grandiose approach that they're by far the best team in football. I don't think that's true, but they're definitely in the top tier. They're definitely going to be right in it comes year end and really don't have a lot of weaknesses. So it's going to be an exciting year for the Bills and Bills fans. Let me know in the comments down below. Do you agree with the ranking now, before, after? What do you think of the analysis on this team? Just let me know in the comments. And also, if you're still here, thank you for sticking around. But please do hit that like button if you haven't so far. And yeah, we'll see you in a couple days for our next deep dive, as we got just 2 more of these babies left, and then football is here, baby. So peace out, everybody. We'll see you then.